April 7th, 1972, 4:30 in the morning. Umberto's Clam House, 129 Mulberry Street, Little Italy, Manhattan. Joey Gallo was sitting at a butcher block table, eating shrimp and scone jelly with his wife, his 10-year-old stepdaughter, and his sister. He was celebrating his 43rd birthday. The smell of garlic and fried clams hung in the air. Checkered tablecloths, low voices. Then 4 men walked through the door carrying .32 and .38 caliber revolvers. They opened fire. 20 shots. Gallo swore, tried to pull his own gun, and flipped the table to shield his family. He took bullets in his back, his left elbow, and his buttock. He staggered toward the front door, bleeding through his pinstripe suit, stumbled out onto Hester Street, and collapsed next to his black 1971 Cadillac. His bodyguard, Pete the Greek, was hit in the hip. His sister was screaming. His stepdaughter, Lisa, just 10 years old, watched the whole thing. The whole hit took less than 30 seconds. Joey Gallo bled out in the street on the same day he was born. This was not just another mobster getting clipped in a restaurant. Joey Gallo was the guy who kept a pet lion named Cleo in his Brooklyn basement. He read Sartre and Camus in prison. He befriended black gangsters when no Italian mobster dared even sit next to one. He kidnapped his own boss's top men and declared war on the entire Profaci crime family. He walked into Bobby Kennedy's Senate hearing room, looked at the carpet, and said, "Nice carpet. Good for a crap game." He was 5'6", blonde, blue-eyed, and diagnosed by a court psychiatrist as a paranoid schizophrenic, and he was the most dangerous man in Brooklyn. This is the story of how one man tried to rewrite the rules of the American Mafia, how a kid from Red Hook became a hitman, a philosopher, a celebrity socialite, and the most wanted target in New York's underworld. From President Street to prison to the Copacabana to a pool of blood on Mulberry Street, this is the rise and violent fall of Crazy Joe Gallo. But here is what most people never talk about. Gallo did not just fight the Colombo family. He tried to do something no one in the Mafia had ever attempted. He tried to unite black and Italian criminal organizations into a new kind of power structure. And for a brief, wild moment in the early 1970s, he almost pulled it off. To understand Joey Gallo, you have to understand where he came from. Red Hook, Brooklyn, 1930s and 40s. This was a neighborhood where the docks ran everything, where longshoremen drank their paychecks and wise guys collected the rest. Joey was born on April 7th, 1929, to Umberto and Mary Gallo. His father, Umberto, was a bootlegger during Prohibition who took his earnings and invested them into a loan sharking operation. He ran a Greasy Spoon restaurant in the Kensington section of Brooklyn. And he did absolutely nothing to discourage his 3 sons from following him into the life. Joey was the middle child. His older brother Larry was quiet and calculating. His younger brother Albert, who they called Kid Blast, was the loyal soldier. But Joey was different. Joey was electric. He dropped out of high school at 16. Shortly after, he was involved in a car accident that gave him a permanent nervous tic. Some people thought it made him look unstable. He used that. He leaned into it. Around this time, he and his childhood friend Pete Diapoulis, who everyone called Pete the Greek, and a guy named Frank Iliano formed a small crew. They started with jukebox and candy machine rackets. The scheme was simple. They would approach a bar or a restaurant and tell the owner he needed a jukebox. If the owner said no, Joey would pull a knife and hold it to his throat until the man changed his mind. Within a few years, Joey Gallo controlled the jukebox racket across a wide stretch of Brooklyn. People in the neighborhood started calling him Joey the Blonde. You have to understand something about Joey that made him different from every other street kid running rackets in Brooklyn. He was obsessed with movies. Specifically, he was obsessed with the 1947 film Kiss of Death. There is a character in that movie, played by Richard Widmark, named Tommy Udo, a cackling, unpredictable psychopath. Joey Gallo did not just watch that movie, he studied it. He started quoting Tommy Udo. He started walking like him, talking like him, using that same unhinged energy. And when you combine a real capacity for violence with a guy who is performing the role of a psychopath, you get something genuinely terrifying. That was Joey Gallo. After an arrest in 1950, he was evaluated by court psychiatrists who diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. That diagnosis followed him for the rest of his life. People started calling him Crazy Joe. He never tried to shake that name. He wore it like armor. By the mid-1950s, the Gallo brothers had caught the attention of Joe Profaci, the boss of one of New York's 5 families. Profaci saw potential in these wild kids from Red Hook. He brought them into the fold, and almost immediately he put them to work on one of the biggest hits in Mafia history. On October 25, 1957, Albert Anastasia, the boss of what would later become the Gambino family and the man known as the Lord High Executioner of Murder, Inc., was sitting in a barber's chair at the Park Sheraton Hotel on 7th Avenue in Manhattan. He was getting a shave. 2 gunmen walked in, and they did not hesitate. They shot Albert Anastasia multiple times. He died in that chair, surrounded by shattered mirrors and blood-soaked towels. The hit was one of the most famous in Mafia history, and Joey Gallo later bragged about it openly. "You can just call us the Barbershop Quartet," he told people. "That tells you everything you need to know about how Joey Gallo operated." Most guys who kill a Mafia boss keep their mouths shut for the rest of their lives. Joey Gallo made jokes about it. Here is where the trouble started. Gallo expected a serious reward for his role in the Anastasia killing. A bigger cut of the family's rackets. More territory. More respect. Joe Profaci did not deliver. Profaci was old school. He hoarded money. He demanded a $25 tribute from every single member of the family, which does not sound like much, but it was the principle. He expected his soldiers to kick up constantly while he sat on his fortune. The Gallo brothers watched Profaci collect and collect while they scraped for scraps. Joey decided he was done waiting. But here is the thing about Joey Gallo. He did not just complain about it. He did something so audacious that nobody in the Mafia had seen anything like it before. On February 27, 1961, the Gallo brothers kidnapped 4 of Profaci's top men. Not low-level guys, not soldiers. They grabbed Joseph Magliocco, the underboss and Profaci's own brother-in-law. They grabbed Frank Profaci, the boss's brother. They grabbed Caporegime Salvatore Musacchia. And they grabbed soldier John Simone. 4 of the most important men in the family, snatched off the streets in a single coordinated move. Profaci himself barely escaped, fleeing to Florida for safety. Think about the nerve it took to do that. This was a soldier kidnapping his own bosses. In the Mafia, that is not rebellion. That is a declaration of war. The Gallos held the hostages and demanded a complete restructuring of how the family's money was divided. They wanted a bigger cut. They wanted respect. They wanted what they had earned. Profaci's consigliere, Charles Lo Cicero, negotiated a deal. The hostages were released peacefully. Profaci agreed to give the Gallos better terms. But here is what nobody should have been surprised by. Profaci had no intention of keeping that deal, not for a second. On August 20th, 1961, Profaci sent men to kill Larry Gallo and a crew member named Joseph Gioeli, known as Joe Jelly. The hit on Joe Jelly succeeded. He disappeared and was never seen again. But the attempt on Larry Gallo became one of the most infamous scenes in Mafia history. Carmine Persico and Salvatore D'Ambrosio lured Larry to the Sahara Lounge on Utica Avenue in Brooklyn. While they were sitting at the bar, Persico wrapped a garrote around Larry's neck and started strangling him. Larry was seconds from death when a police officer walked into the bar on a routine check. The cops saw what was happening and the killers fled. Larry survived with rope burns across his throat. That scene, by the way, inspired one of the most famous moments in The Godfather, when Luca Brasi gets strangled at the bar. That was Larry Gallo's near-death experience, dramatized for the screen. Now the war was fully on. The Gallo-Profaci conflict raged through Brooklyn for the next 2 years. 9 men were murdered. 3 more vanished. Bodies turned up in car trunks, Men disappeared from social clubs and were never found. The Gallos operated out of their headquarters at 51 President Street in the Carroll Gardens section of Brooklyn, a 3-story brick tenement they called the dormitory. It was here that Joey Gallo kept his pet lion, Cleo, in the basement. You have to picture this, a full-grown lion in the basement of a Brooklyn walk-up. Gallo would bring people down to see it. He would use it to intimidate rivals. Sometimes he would bring Cleo out on a leash. The neighbors on President Street had a lion living below them. That was the world of Joey Gallo. But the war caught up with him. In November of 1961, Gallo was convicted of conspiracy and extortion for trying to muscle in on a businessman's operation. On December 21, 1961, he was sentenced to 7 to 14 years in prison. And while Joey Gallo sat behind bars, the world outside kept turning. Joe Profaci died of cancer on June 7, 1962. Leadership of the family eventually passed to a man named Joseph Colombo, and the family was renamed. The Profaci family became the Colombo family. But the Gallos never forgot, and Joey Gallo, locked away in a cell, was about to undergo the most extraordinary transformation of his life. Here is where Joey Gallo's story separates itself from every other mafia tale you have ever heard. Most guys go to prison and come out harder, angrier, more violent. Joey Gallo went to prison and came out a philosopher. He was incarcerated at 3 different New York State prisons: Green Haven, Attica, Auburn. At Auburn, he took up watercolor painting, bright, emotional colors on canvas. He worked as an elevator operator in the prison woodworking shop. But the real change happened in his mind. Gallo taught himself the Evelyn Wood speed-reading technique, and then he read everything: Sartre, Camus, Nietzsche, Machiavelli, Kafka. He read up to 10 books at a time. He gave himself what amounted to a graduate-level education in philosophy, political theory, art history, and literature. He wrote poetry. He called himself the Walt Whitman of the streets, and proposed a book of verse he wanted to title Cracked Bricks. He debated existentialism with anyone who would listen. He once asked a visitor whether they preferred Sartre or Camus as casually as another man might ask about the Yankees. But Gallo did not just educate himself. He did something far more dangerous, something that would set off a chain of events leading directly to his death. At Green Haven, he befriended an African-American drug trafficker named Leroy Barnes, known as Nicky Barnes. Nicky Barnes would later become one of the most powerful heroin dealers in Harlem, known as Mr. Untouchable. And it was Gallo who mentored him. Gallo recognized something that no one else in the Italian Mafia was willing to see. The power structure in Harlem was shifting. Black criminal organizations were gaining territory, gaining muscle, gaining independence. Rather than fight them, Gallo decided to ally with them. He coached Nicky Barnes on how to professionalize his operation, how to upgrade his organization from a street crew into a real criminal enterprise. In 1964, Gallo even sued the Department of Corrections after he was punished for allowing a black barber to cut his hair. In a mafia where black men were not even allowed to enter Italian social clubs, Joey Gallo was building bridges. That took either incredible foresight or a complete disregard for the rules, probably both. During a prison riot at Auburn, Gallo rescued a severely wounded corrections officer from a mob of angry inmates. The officer was so grateful that he later testified on Gallo's behalf at a parole hearing. Think about the complexity of this man. A diagnosed schizophrenic, a convicted extortionist, a suspected killer, and here he is saving a guard's life during a riot while reading Nietzsche in his cell at night. On April 11th, 1971, after nearly 10 years behind bars, Joey Gallo walked out of prison and back onto the streets of New York City. And everything had changed. His brother Larry was dead. Cancer had taken him in May of 1968. The family he had gone to war for was now run by Joseph Colombo, a man Gallo considered a pretender, and Colombo sent a peace offering, $1,000. Joey Gallo looked at that money and laughed. He demanded 100,000. Colombo refused. That refusal set the final clock ticking. But before the violence resumed, something strange happened. Joey Gallo became a celebrity. His first wife, Jeffy Lee Boyd, was a Las Vegas showgirl who had previously been married to the jazz saxophonist Jerry Mulligan. Through Jeffy, who lived on 8th Street in Greenwich Village, Joey entered a world of jazz clubs, beatnik pads, and downtown bohemian culture. He fit right in. He could discuss German expressionism and its influence on film noir. He could debate the merits of fascism versus communism over cocktails. He was charming, articulate, and genuinely brilliant. And he was also a violent criminal who had spent a decade in prison for extortion. That combination was irresistible to the New York literati. The list of people who gravitated to Joey Gallo reads like a guest list for the most interesting dinner party in 1971 Manhattan. Actor Jerry Orbach and his wife Marta became close friends. Ben Gazzara, Peter Falk, Joan Hackett, playwright Neil Simon, comedian David Steinberg. Gallo was even scheduled to appear alongside writer Gore Vidal, activist Abby Hoffman, and filmmaker Otto Preminger at an event. Susan Sontag, the voice of the city's intelligentsia, later said, "I wish I'd had the chance to talk to Joe Gallo before he died." Writer Gay Talese put it simply, "He almost became one of the beautiful people." Gallo loved the attention. He loved walking into Sardi's, the famous Theater District restaurant, where you could hear a pin drop when he entered. He dressed impeccably, pinstripe suits, dark shirts, white ties. He leaned into the gangster image for his artistic friends. His second wife, Sina Essery, later told reporters that people were mesmerized by him. He had that quality that attracted people to him no matter who they were. He was extremely intelligent, and he could talk about anything: art, theater, politics, philosophy, all the things he had been reading about in prison. Meanwhile, Jerry Orbach had just starred alongside a young Robert De Niro in the 1971 film The Gang That Could Not Shoot Straight, based on columnist Jimmy Breslin's novel about the Gallo crew. Orbach played Kid Sally Palumbo, a character loosely based on Joey himself. So now you had an actor playing a gangster, based on a real gangster, who was his actual friend. The lines between reality and fiction had completely dissolved. That was the world Joey Gallo inhabited in the last year of his life. But while Gallo was sipping cocktails with celebrities, the streets had not forgotten him. On June 28, 1971, Joseph Colombo was shot 3 times at an Italian Unity Day rally in Columbus Circle, Manhattan. The gunman was a black man named Jerome Johnson, who was killed immediately after the shooting. Colombo survived, but was left in a vegetative state. He would spend 7 years in a coma before dying of cardiac arrest. Everyone in the underworld looked at the same evidence: a black gunman, an unprecedented hit on a Mafia boss. And Joey Gallo, the only Italian mobster with deep connections to black criminal organizations, had just been released from prison 2 months earlier. You know what the streets concluded. Whether Gallo actually ordered the Colombo hit has never been proven. Some investigators believe Carlo Gambino, the most powerful boss in New York, orchestrated the whole thing and used Gallo as a convenient scapegoat. The accounts vary on this, but it did not matter what the truth was. It mattered what the Colombo family believed, and they believed Joey Gallo had shot their boss. Remember the name Carmine Persico, the same man who tried to strangle Larry Gallo with a garrote at the Sahara Lounge back in 1961. Persico was now positioning himself to take over the Colombo family, and he wanted Gallo gone. But Joey Gallo was not hiding. That was never his style. He walked through Little Italy like he owned it. He ate at the best restaurants. He attended shows at the Copacabana. He was working on a book deal with Viking Press. He was meeting with Hollywood producers. 3 weeks before his 43rd birthday, he married Sina Essery, a 29-year-old actress. He had a stepchild he adored. Life was good. Life was also about to end. On the night of April 6th, 1972, Joey and Sina joined Jerry and Marta Orbach at the Copacabana to see comedian Don Rickles and singer Peter Lamangello perform. It was the night before Joey's birthday. After the show, the group drove downtown in that black Cadillac. They arrived at Umberto's Clam House after 4 a.m. Joey, Sina, his 10-year-old stepdaughter Lisa, his sister Carmela, Pete the Greek Diapoulos, and Pete's girlfriend. They sat down, they ordered shrimp, scungilli, clams. They were between seafood courses when the door opened. A Colombo associate named Joseph Luparelli had spotted Gallo earlier and driven to a social club to alert members of the crew. The gunmen arrived quickly, 4 men with revolvers. They walked into the dining room without hesitation. The first shots hit Gallo in the back. He swore. He reached for his own weapon. 20 shots filled that small restaurant. Gallo grabbed the butcher block table and flipped it, creating a barrier between the gunman and his family. Even with bullets in his body, he moved toward the door. Witnesses said he was trying to draw fire away from his wife and stepdaughter. He stumbled through the entrance, crossed onto Hester Street, and collapsed beside his Cadillac. Pete the Greek took a bullet in the hip. Carmela screamed. Little Lisa, 10 years old, watched everything. Police arrived minutes later and found Joey Gallo dying on the pavement. He did not make it to the hospital alive. Time of death, approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, April 7th, 1972. His 43rd birthday, the same date he had entered the world. 3 days later, at his funeral, his sister Carmela stood by the casket and made a promise that everyone in the underworld heard. "The streets are going to run red with blood, Joey." She was right. In the months that followed, at least 10 more men were killed in a new wave of warfare between the Gallo faction and the Colombo family. It was the most violent mafia conflict New York had seen in decades. The war dragged on for years before what remained of the Gallo crew negotiated peace and rejoined the Colombo family. The gunmen who killed Joey Gallo were never officially identified. The leading theory points to a Colombo hit squad. But Frank Sheeran, the mob enforcer who later claimed to have killed Jimmy Hoffa, also took credit for shooting Gallo. He said the bosses wanted Gallo eliminated because his flashy celebrity lifestyle was drawing too much attention to organized crime. Most mob experts doubt Sheeran's claim. What is documented is that the Colombo family had the motive, the opportunity, and the manpower. The rest remains in the shadows. But here is the part that transforms Joey Gallo from a mob story into something larger. In 1975, 3 years after the killing, Bob Dylan was visiting the home of Jerry and Marta Orbach. He saw a painting of Joey Gallo hanging on the wall and asked about it. What the Orbachs told him that night inspired Dylan to write an 11-minute ballad called Joey, which appeared on his 1976 album Desire. The song paints Gallo as a romantic anti-hero, a man who stood alone against the machine. "I never considered him a gangster," Dylan later said. "I always thought of him as some kind of hero, an underdog fighting against the elements." The song was not universally loved. Rock critic Lester Bangs called it one of the most mindlessly amoral pieces of repellent romanticist trash ever recorded. And plenty of people who actually lived through the Gallo Wars agreed. Joey Gallo was responsible for a conflict that killed over a dozen men. He terrorized business owners with knives. He was convicted of extortion. But he also read Camus. He also painted watercolors. He also saved a prison guard's life. He also tried to build alliances across racial lines that no one in the Mafia had ever attempted. The truth about Joey Gallo does not fit neatly into a category, and that is exactly what makes his story worth telling. What happened to the people around him tells you something, too. His brother Albert, Kid Blast, survived the wars and eventually faded from public life. Nicky Barnes, the man Gallo mentored in prison, went on to become one of the biggest heroin dealers in American history before being arrested and eventually becoming a government informant. Jerry Orbach went on to become Detective Lenny Briscoe on Law and Order, one of the most iconic television roles in American history. He never forgot his friendship with Joey. Sina Essery took her daughter Lisa and moved to Tennessee to escape the world her husband had left behind. Lisa grew up to become a casting director in Hollywood. The Colombo family continued its cycles of violence and internal warfare for decades. Carmine Persico eventually became boss and spent most of his life in prison. Joey Gallo spent 43 years trying to be something the Mafia could not contain. He wanted to be an intellectual, a revolutionary, a celebrity, a kingmaker. He wanted to tear down the old order and replace it with something that crossed racial lines, crossed cultural boundaries, crossed every rule the Mafia had ever established. And here is the brutal truth. The Mafia does not reward visionaries. It eliminates them. Joey Gallo challenged a system designed to crush anyone who challenged it. He read Nietzsche and quoted Camus, but he forgot the one lesson every philosopher teaches. The world does not change because one man wills it. It changes when enough people are ready. And in 1972, the Mafia was not ready for Joey Gallo. He died eating scungilli at 4:30 in the morning on his birthday. A lion tamer with no lion left. A philosopher who ran out of arguments. A man who almost became one of the beautiful people, buried instead with bullets in his back. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment below. Tell us, was Joey Gallo a visionary who was ahead of his time, or was he just a reckless gangster who got exactly what was coming? We want to hear your take.